We already have a good turnout, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Seth, you want to go ahead and start?
Absolutely. So let's start. Welcome everyone tonight to our November board meeting. I want to extend a warm welcome to former Presidents Jeannie Weiner and Sharon Lipton, who are also joining us tonight. Welcome, both of you. We're so excited that you're with us tonight. And we're really also very excited to have both Nolan Finley and Stephen Henderson to make a presentation this evening. I want to kick off the meeting and indicate that we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization, and we do not endorse or oppose any candidate for public office. I'd now like to introduce our speakers for the beginning part of our meeting. Nolan Finley began his newspaper career as a copy boy at the Detroit News while a senior in college. After a brief stint with the Jackson Citizen-Patriot, he returned to the Detroit News as a reporter covering the administration of Mayor Coleman A. Young. He's been the newspaper's city editor, business editor, politics editor, and deputy managing editor. In 2000, Mr. Finley was named editorial page editor, and his columns have appeared in the newspaper ever since. As he wrote in his introductory column, Finley is a product of the Detroit News and the Detroit community. He graduated both from Schoolcraft College and Wayne State University, and in 2012 was inducted into the Michigan Journalism Hall of Fame. Finley is co-host of One Detroit on Detroit Public Television. His counterpart and friend, Stephen Henderson, is an American journalist who won the 2014 Pulitzer Prize for commentary and the 2014 National Association of Black Journalists Journalist of the Year Award while writing for the Detroit Free Press. A native of Detroit, Stephen is a graduate of U of D, Jesuit High School, and University of Michigan. Since 2015, Stephen has been the host of Detroit Today on WDET. In 2020, Stephen founded Bridge Detroit, where he serves as executive editor. He has worked for the Baltimore Sun, the Chicago Tribune, the Lexington Herald Leader, and Knights Ritter. Henderson is co-host of One Detroit and host of American Black Journal on Detroit Public Television. Welcome to both of you gentlemen. The floor is yours. Take it away.
So I'm gonna just jump in and—
Please, Lynn, jump in.
Thank you. Yes. So I work with Stephen and Nolan with the Civility Project, and it's in that context that we're here tonight. And they are widely working with groups all over the country to try to build civility, learn how to listen and to have conversations across not only political lines, but any kind of division. I work with them in facilitating that. And so tonight, Nancy had asked us to start with a radio clip. So I don't know, Nancy, if you wanted to just introduce the context and why you requested it, and I can play it, and then we'll jump into an election recap.
Sure. Thank you, Lynn. And welcome, Nolan and Stephen. Great to see you both. So this clip I've actually heard twice already. Once on Stephen's show, the first time it aired, and then again when Stephen was on point, maybe last week. The days are running together. But Stephen had voters on from different sides of the aisle just before the election. And this one clip really stuck with me because it was very disconcerting to me. And frankly, Stephen, your reaction to what she said, this is Jackie from Macomb County, was palpable. I mean, it took your breath away. And I almost was wondering how you were going to continue because it was just so profound. So Stephen would have people from different sides of the aisle. This was Jackie and talking about the issue of racism.
Okay, so I'll play that and then we can jump into the election recap.
Joe Biden has never said the things that President Trump has said. Never. And even if it did, this idea that it doesn't matter is what I guess I'm trying to get you to explain to me. Why doesn't that, which affects me, my children, my family, my community, why doesn't that matter more in your choice?
Probably because it doesn't directly affect me. There are bigger issues for me.
Yeah.
Economic issues, education issues that affect me more.
So with that, why don't we start, Nolan and Stephen, with just sort of your recap of the election broadly. And then I do have a few specific questions that we can dial into once we sort of evaluate where we are and how we got here.
Well, I'll start since that clip kind of introduces some of the way I think people have been feeling, during the campaign and since the election. I'll give a little more context. Jacqueline was someone who we asked to be on the show because she lived in Macomb County. She had voted twice for Barack Obama and then had switched in 2016 to voting for Donald Trump and then went in 2018 and voted for Gretchen Whitmer. And so we had a really interesting conversation about how she chose candidates to put her support behind. And she was wonderful. I mean, I want to say up front, I was really grateful to her for coming on the show and talking about these things. She was very forthright and honest about the things that go through her mind. And that's not easy. And the last thing I ever want to do is make fun of somebody like that or put them in a bad position. I mean, I give her a lot of credit for coming and having that conversation. But we did reach a point in the conversation where we were talking about race and racism. And, you heard me ask her why that issue didn't play more strongly in the choices that she was making. She was talking about how she was going to vote for Donald Trump again this year. And I wanted to know why that didn't matter. And her answer was as honest as anything anyone has ever said to me. She said, it doesn't affect me. It's not the most important thing to me. And I thought, Nancy, you're right. It did take my breath away. The stark honesty of it, but also the reality of what she was saying, this idea that my well-being, my family's well-being, my community's well-being doesn't rate that highly in the way that she's voting. And I think that is the essential core of the division that exists in this country right now. There are people who are affected by the things that we see around us that have to do with inequality, historic inequality, systemic inequality. They have been raising their voices for decades, if not centuries. They are raising their voices louder now, in part because of some things that have happened, also in large part because of the person who's been in the White House for 4 years, who can't tell the difference between Klan marchers and people who show up to protest for them. And the idea that that the pushback against that, the important pushback against all of that, the need to reframe race and racism in this country doesn't rate for some voters is not just distressing to me personally. It is. It's the thing that worries me the most when I send my children out into the world every day. It worries me constantly about my son, who is 17 years old, drives a car on his own, and is out having to contend with the same world that his dad had to contend with, and that his grandfather and his great-grandfather had to contend with, and that things are not sufficiently better or safer for him So I mean, on a personal level, it bothers me, but I also have this tremendous sadness about our country and about our ability to live together in it and to govern together in it because of that. I think there are a lot of people who have either lost or have subdued the idea that what's good for somebody else who's not me is good for all of us. It's better for our country. I have a great friend who was the cartoonist in Lexington, Kentucky, where I began my newspaper career. And I remember a couple days before the 1992 election, he drew a cartoon of voters in line to go vote, a long line of people, and each of them had a thought bubble above their head, and in each bubble it said, "What's in this for me?" Like each person, that's what they were thinking. And I told him then, I was like, that's a pretty cynical way to think of the way people are going to vote. I don't know that that's right. But the conversation with Jacqueline was a stark reminder of how real that is. And that there are a lot of people who quite earnestly, this is not someone I would, got the sense is a bad person. I don't think she would do anybody any harm. But in her mind, what's good for me is not as important as what matters to her, even though what's good for me is probably pretty good for the country, and it's got to be dealt with if we're gonna live together. And so I think, if we think about what's happened in the last 7 days since the election, a lot of it can be understood, I think, through that lens. A lot of it can be interpreted through this incredible American insularity and selfishness that is driven by our culture. It is driven by our media. It is driven by our politics. And no matter what the resolution is to the election itself, and I think it's pretty obvious what that resolution will be at this point, that is our problem. That is where the rubber meets the road in terms of the problems that we have and solving them. If you think about the pandemic, think of that point of view in the pandemic. How often have we heard people basically say, this is not really affecting me, so I'm not going to do the things that we need to do to solve it. When we talk about systemic inequality, how many people say, not my problem? We can't function that way. We can't get further than where we are that way. And worse, I think we risk an incredible amount of not just tension, but conflict in the near future if we can't move off of this square. I mean, I think people's patience is short. People are on hair triggers, especially people on the right. Showing up with guns at voting places. I don't understand that. I don't understand it. We're at a dangerous inflection point, and it is that sense that I'm out for me and you're on your own. To hell, I had a English teacher in senior year at U of D High, who, when we were reading The Great Gatsby, said that the prevailing attitude of most of the characters in the book was, to hell with you, Jack, I got mine. And his whole lecture was about, don't be that guy. Don't go out in the world and be that guy. That's not what we're teaching you here. I fear that there's just way too much of that driving our decisions and our politics right now.
Nolan, what is
it? I think we are a divided nation. I mean, I did not expect this election to be this close, quite frankly. given what we saw in 2018, I thought that it was building toward a Democratic landslide in 2020. Didn't happen. It surprised me. I think it surprised a lot of people, but it does reflect on just how evenly divided we are as a country, not just on one issue, but it seems like on every issue. If you look, at the outcome of the vote in Michigan and other places, they're very, very slim margins. And I think given the closeness of the election, if it was going to be a close election, I believe what we're seeing now was inevitable, no matter who won. I don't think it would have been any different had Biden lost. I don't think people would be saying, okay, we'll just accept the results and forget about it. This was always going to be a contentious after election period as long as the vote was close. I think I thought coming into this, it would be better for the Republican Party if it were a landslide against Trump, because it would allow them to come to the reality that they need to rebuild, and they need to rebuild without Trump and the Trump family, and bring back some of those Republicans that they drove out. I think had Trump won, it would have been a very bad year for Republicans in 2022, and particularly in 2024. So I think, the Republicans should be sort of looking at this as a victory on the larger scale, because if they do end up keeping the U.S. Senate, I think that they'll be better positioned to rebuild their party, broaden it out a little. The closeness of it, I'm worried, as the Senator Rubio said today, that if Trump could get the nomination again today, and I believe that's true, I'm not sure it's going to be true 4 years from now if the party looks at this as a rebuilding period, sort of like a sports team. Well, we've come close, but we're never going to get over the top with these players, with this team. And so we got to tear it down and rebuild. And I hope, and I would think, that's what they're going to try to do over the next couple of years, or the next 4 years. But, I think where we are, it was inevitable, because we are a nation divided on so many fronts, and so bitterly so. And there's this feeling that we got to win, that we just, even compared to 2000, which also was a bitter and contested election, I was, I covered that. And, I remember writing at that time, about our remarkable ability as Americans to fight, and then eventually accept our losses and move on. And I think we're well beyond that point now, to our detriment. It seems as if winning is all that matters. And, I think that's what you're seeing today.
So you guys, could you speak a little bit to this question that a lot of Americans have had in this election season about the health or welfare of our democracy? I know people on both sides were concerned that if the other side won, they were scared, that it didn't feel like their America. People felt like it was the end of democracy if their side didn't prevail. Those are really serious statements. And so maybe could you speak to that a little bit?
Well, that's how it's been for the last 4 years, hasn't it? I mean, we've been here. I think that we'll get through this, and I think our better nature will prevail. I think we'll eventually see that the nation is more prosperous and better if we all come together to address our problems, whether they're our problems or somebody else's problems. If we recognize the need to make every American feel comfortable in the country and every American prosperous in this country. I think that whole notion of civility is going to be urgent over the next couple of years, to learn to talk to each other and learn to discuss. I don't think our democracy's at threat. I saw a poll today, 80% of Republicans believe Trump has lost the election. That's an encouraging sign. they're going to fight it out. And I think it's important to settle in a very careful, deliberate way all of the questions, all of the rumors, all of the conspiracy theories, settle them, let the people who were involved in the electoral process, the people explain what went on and why what you might have thought you saw, you didn't really see or you misinterpreted. Let's make as many people comfortable as possible with the outcome and move on. So I'm not sure this period is detrimental. I think getting people's concerns out there, debunking the conspiracy theories, explaining what happened will help folks accept it. And, you know, they got to accept it and move on.
I just want
I feel like,
Stephen, 1 second. I just want to acknowledge, we see all the questions and we're going to get to them, but I just want to sort of get through this initial part and then we're going to tackle all the questions. So thank you for that. But go ahead, Stephen.
Yeah, I do think, you know, there are some existential threats to the republic and to democracy that have been indulged, in particular over the last 4 years, certainly by the person who's the president, you know, who didn't have a whole lot invested in the idea of those institutions to begin with, and ran really against the idea of those institutions, and has done a lot in the last 4 years to try to undermine them, both from inside the White House and, you know, through sort of external messaging. I mean, I think he's done a lot to erode his supporters' belief in those institutions. And the Republican Party at some point is going to have to decide, you know, how long they want to stay on that ride. You know, it got them a presidency and a majority of the Congress 4 years ago, and they went off and did what they wanted to do. I think they hoped that you know, secretly that it would continue this time. That they could say, well, we don't like this, but we're in charge still. I mean, there's a devil's bargain afoot here that I think at some point you had to come and reckon with. At the same time, I've been saying pretty consistently over the last 48 hours or so that people got to take a deep breath a little bit about what's going on. I mean, you've got still a president who is threatening to overturn, you know, the game board and throw the pieces all around and institute chaos. But really his ability to actually do that at this point is pretty neutralized. I mean, there are lots of other institutions that are responsible for, you know, the transfer of power from one administration to another. He doesn't have a whole lot to do with most of it. Really, his only role is to counsel the people who work for him to cooperate with the new administration. And frankly, even if they don't, it doesn't make that much of a difference. You know, I keep saying that what we need to do is get people to think about what's supposed to be happening right now, at this moment, on this day, and what is really happening at this moment on this day. I think the president likes to make everything seem uncertain, as though he's going to go in and make everything different than it is. But nothing has happened so far that wasn't supposed to happen. We had election day. The ballots came in. They continue to come in some cases through the mail, and they're being counted in all of the states. They're being counted in the states that were close. They're still being counted in places like California, where it takes forever to count all the votes. You know, 54 million people vote in California. There's no difference between the process there and in Arizona, other than the fact that the margin is close. And so the things that are supposed to be happening are actually happening. One of the things that's supposed to happen, in addition, is that the president, if he's unhappy with the outcome or believes that there was an illegitimate process, he has every right to go to court and to file a suit that alleges that and have that case adjudicated. That's part of the process too. And so we haven't seen anything that actually says things are not going to happen the way they're supposed to happen. We have, you know, people who are pretty upset about the outcome. Some people are pretty upset about the outcome. The person who's the most upset is the occupant of the White House. You know, I mean, he doesn't like to lose. He said that. He said that before the election. He does not like to lose. And so he's going to perform for a bit and get as much attention as he can about that. I predict that within a few weeks, he's just going to go away because he's not going to be able to get attention for what he's doing anymore. He's going to pack up and go to Mar-a-Lago. And that'd probably be the last we see of him. He might not even be there on January 20th when the new administration takes place. And that's fine. I mean, what difference does that really make? But I do think that there are bigger questions that we still need to address. And I think the Republican Party in particular has got to come to terms with the things that it indulged over the last 4 years that were threats to those institutions or wipe them out, and whether you want to keep rolling that way. If Democrats get control, complete control, whether it's now or sometime in the future, there won't be any credibility to say to them, hey, don't do the same thing. Republicans have blown through all of that. They've done whatever they could do for the sake of exercising power. And once you get to that space, it's really hard to tell the other side to row it back. And so that's the danger I see. I don't like the brinksmanship. I don't like the idea that each side figures when we get power, we're just going to run crazy and do whatever we want and hope that the voters don't punish us. That's not a way to govern.
Well, but Steve, it's the way we've governed for decades. I mean, this is the first time.
That's true, Nolan. Not for decades.
For decades, for God's sakes. There was a reason the Democratic Party got thumped in 2010, and that was the overreach in 2008. And in 2022, Democrats will get thumped if they overreach. You would hope they've learned a lesson. I think the best thing that happened to Democrats, or could happen to Democrats, and Republicans as well, is if Republicans hold the Senate, because it checks those worst instincts. But don't think that one party or the other is not going to use total control to push their agenda in. We've seen both of them do it in the past. I mean,
we've had this argument before, though, about 2010. I mean, again, I would ask you.
I was right the last time, and again.
The list.
Guys, I'm going to jump in, and I'm going to answer the question.
List of things that are overreach. I mean, saving the economy. We were losing 700,000 jobs a month when Barack Obama took office. He had to fix that. He did it as best he could. The auto industry was about to go bankrupt. He stepped in and figured that out. The only major policy initiative that got done in the first 2 years because of all that was healthcare. And on that front, he invited Republicans into the process. He said, come sit at the table and let's talk about what you want.
And how did the voters react in 2010? If it was all so swell, why did they overwhelmingly up and down the ballot? From dog catcher to president, they turned out Democrats.
It was a policy that Republicans described as the end of the world. We hadn't seen enough of what it could actually do for voters to make up their minds, and the early parts of it were difficult. So yeah, I mean, politically, that was an easy sell.
Put in place with sheer partisanship, and voters react poorly to that. Go ahead, Lynn.
What's the current approval rating for the ACA? 75%. It's the most popular program in history. 10 years later.
Stephen, you have so many questions we have to get to.
Go ahead.
We have a lot, and we only have a little bit of time. So let's try to keep these answers as concise as we can.
Sorry, yeah.
That's okay. You guys have a lot of questions.
No, that's what they want us to do.
I know. Okay, so the first question is this not a landslide? Does the popular vote not matter, or would it only be a landslide from an electoral college perspective?
Well, it's not a landslide from either perspective at this point. It's more likely to be a landslide from the electoral college perspective. What is it on the popular vote? 2-3%? I haven't kept track. It's a very close popular vote, so it's not a landslide. It'll
be like 3 or 4 by the end.
A landslide.
Count the votes from, Yeah,
a landslide.
The popular vote would be driven by, the popular vote would be driven at this point by what happens in California. I mean, once you count those votes, there's just going to be this incredible margin that opens up. It'll be 5 million votes or more, which is way more than 2 or 3%. But the electoral, the electoral gap will be somewhat significant, I think. I mean, it's already pretty dramatic.
It'll be similar to what we saw last time. I think to get a landslide, you have to get in the double-digit range. This was a close election. I think it'll remain a close election as the count goes. But the Electoral College, when all these states are added, that will make it look like a far tighter or far more exaggerated win than it really was in most places.
Okay. The next question is, what is the role of the media in the divisive place we are now in?
I don't know. I think
it's all our fault.
It's all our fault, right? You see, we can't agree on anything. I do think that that there are elements of the media that drive not only the divisiveness, but the panic around the divisiveness, right? Everything is this kind of screaming emergency headline that makes people feel anxious. I mean, I had a conversation with my mother this morning where she was convinced that Donald Trump won't leave the White House, that if he loses, if this is the way it works, and he lost the election, that he's going to stage a coup with generals. I kept telling her, no, the generals like him. they've all deserted him. I think there's an alarmist effect of media right now that's designed to get attention for media outlets that drives this and thrives off of the divisions that exist. Now, does that mean the media are responsible for that division? I don't know. I think we don't make it better when we do that, but I don't know that we're the cause of the differences.
So another question came in asking about the Lincoln Project. Was that a branch of Republicans that choose civility, and so they won't support Trump because he's anti-civility? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, they didn't produce very civil ads, so I don't think they're a model of civility. I mean, there are a lot of longtime mainstream Republicans, including myself, who wanted nothing to do with Donald Trump, felt like he would be bad for the party, bad for the country. We supported many of his policies, but felt his overall demeanor and divisiveness was unacceptable. I mean, folks who are Reagan Republicans, Goldwater Republicans, call them what you will, we're not used to that sort of display. Populism is not really compatible, I don't believe, with conservatism. And that's why a lot of the mainstream, some of the mainstream Republicans deserted him. There's also a whole lot of Republicans who they only want to back a horse that's going to win. They don't care, what that horse is carrying. And so, Lincoln Project were people who felt that, that their party had been hijacked. And, I understand a lot of what they stood for, but I wouldn't consider them a model of civility.
No, I actually know a couple of those guys from my time in Washington. Steve Schmidt is one of the organizers of that project, and I can tell you firsthand, when Justice Alito was being confirmed on the Hill, I did a story about all of the appellate decisions that he'd written on the Third Circuit, and came to the conclusion, the surprising conclusion, that this would be a stalwartly conservative justice who would not see civil rights claims, who would not, all kinds of things. And Steve Schmidt was working then for the Senate Republicans, and just savaged me. I mean, they called me every name you could imagine in the book, and they published an entire dossier about me that they entered into the Senate record of the Judiciary Committee. It was one of the worst stretches of my professional career in terms of criticism. So I don't know about civility. I do know that their sense of what the party is and should be is at real odds with what Donald Trump has been doing. And they're trying to stand up and say, let's go in another direction. I think that's probably healthy. I don't know how much credibility they have with other Republicans. It doesn't seem like they had a terribly profound effect on this election. I mean, if you look at the results, I don't know that they convinced a lot of people inside the Republican Party, Republican voters, to do something different. But, I think going forward, you do need to kind of reclaim what republicanism is. Despite all of the spin about how this was a good election for Republicans, this is the 7th out of 8 presidential contests that they've lost from a popular perspective. There is no major party in American history that has survived a stretch like that before. It survives now because of its strength in small states that have pretty homogenous populations. White rural voters are powering the party, and they are a minority now of people in the country. Doesn't mean they don't matter. It does mean that they aren't the kind of majority that they used to be. I think the party has to really decide what its future looks like. If not for the overwhelming concentration of Republican voters in those small states and in that demographic, I think by now you might have seen another conservative party form around a broader coalition of individuals. You had 12,000 people in Detroit vote for Donald Trump. Go to Miami and look at what happened in the Cuban community and some other Latin American communities in terms of support for Republican ideals. There is the makings of a future conservative party that doesn't look like this Republican Party. The question is, how do you push things to get to that direction?
And I think that's what's going to happen over the next 4 years as they rebuild the party. But you have to keep in mind, these Republicans do have things they believe in, and I think Donald Trump would have lost a lot more Republican voters, and Democrats would have picked up a lot more voters if not for the Democratic platform. I heard a number of Republicans say, I can take Joe Biden. We've known Joe Biden forever. We think Joe Biden's a centrist, but we're worried about where the Democratic Party is going to push them. And those just aren't positions we can embrace. And, I think that's a very legitimate concern they had because, they do stand for something different than what the Democrats stand for. And that's good. That's the way it should be. We don't need two parties standing for on the exact same platform. So, I think this could have been a much, much worse night for Republicans and Donald Trump had the Democratic agenda not been so off-putting to a number of, center-right Republicans.
And so there's a lot of questions actually that speak to this in the chat about, what does the Republican Party stand for now? And this whole disconnect between Trump and what, conservative policies are. So can you maybe speak to that a little bit, Nolan? And also, where will, what will happen to, fiscal conservatives or to Republicans that do align with certain traditional values that the party has held, but now there's such a shakeup that, you know, where will they go and how will that happen?
Well, you know, it's a question for both parties, I think, what happens to their middles, because I don't think that I mean, you see what's going on in the Democratic Party now, this fight between Nancy Pelosi and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, this struggle between moderates and the far left progressives in the Democratic Party is not much different than what will be going on or what should be going on in the Republican Party. There will be a struggle, and hopefully the struggle will be to bring these parties back to the middle. You can ask what happens to fiscal conservatives. What happens to pro-business Democrats? I mean, there are moderates and middle-of-the-road folks in both parties who feel they have not been represented well by the party establishments over the past several years. And you see them, hopefully you'll see them coalescing around candidates who speak more to the middle. I think we've got candidates in both parties, or potential candidates in both parties, emerging who could be those people. I think we have some Democratic and Republican Congress people in Michigan who could be those people. I'm very encouraged by the Problem Solvers Caucus and their effort, a growing effort for people to work together. I think that's where the future of the middle is, the future of both of these parties.
So somebody asked, pursuant to our earlier conversation about the popular vote in the Electoral College, and I know you guys have some thoughts about whether we should be governed and decided by a popular vote and do away with the Electoral College. What are your thoughts about that?
So I think I'm not a fan of the Electoral College in any way. I'm not a fan of the concept. I'm not a fan of the execution of it. I'm not a fan of its historical origins. I mean, you cannot talk about the Electoral College without talking about slavery and all kinds of horrible kinds of inequality that were going on that the founders were concerned about but not motivated to solve. And they thought that coming up with these very strange contortions of democracy were a way to put them off into the future. I mean, you can't talk about the Electoral College without talking about the 3/5 compromise, which is an absolute abomination, a dehumanizing part of the Constitution. So I'm not, we wouldn't as a world leader, we would not tolerate that kind of feature in anyone else's democracy. If an emerging democracy said to us, we're devising a system by which the person who gets the fewest number of votes can still win the election, we'd say, well, that's not a democracy. That's counter to the whole point. At the same time, and I think you've got to always look at all these things in a lot of different ways. One of the things they were trying to do was to protect against the influences and impulses of tyrannical majorities. They were trying to devise a system that did respect democratic impulses, but prevented those impulses from running over minority populations and political interests. And in some ways, the balance of the 230 some years since then has proved them prescient in terms of the ability to maintain a republic for that long with those features. The Senate's composition is another example of that. And I think it's long overdue for us to think about which parts of that system don't make sense and that can be done in a different way. I mean, I think it's really dangerous, for instance, as an African American, to say we should just do away with all of these provisions that protect against tyrannical majorities. I mean, if you think about it, the possibilities in a system where winner take all is everything. Who is going to be on the bad end of that business more often than anybody else? I figure near the front of that line. So that doesn't make sense either. We tend to try to boil these things down to these very simple questions, either or, this is bad, this is good, instead of saying, what's the goal here, and what can we come up with that would serve that goal and protect people from abuse. And so, yeah, I think the Electoral College has proven itself useless and counterintuitive to democracy at this point. I mean, and again, there is no Republican Party without it at this point. You can't lose 7 of 8 elections in a row and survive. It wouldn't be a party. Something else would have emerged. And so I think you've got to start thinking about, okay, well, does that make sense? And if it doesn't, what else can we do? Of course, it's really hard to undo, because it is baked into the Constitution, and we'd have to agree on what came next, which is what we are unable to do on much more minor points. But it's a conversation we need to have, and it's not just the Electoral College; it's the makeup of the Senate. It's the process by which the Senate has say-so over lifetime appointments in the judicial branch. The abuse there has been absolutely legion over the last 10 years. A record number of judges who got no hearings from a Republican Congress when Barack Obama was in his last term. I mean, the system's breaking down and needs to be fixed. I don't know that it needs to be fixed in a way that doesn't provide for some protections.
So we have time for.
I want to address that, Lynn, because I've written a bit about the Electoral College and have expressed some support for the national popular vote movement that Michigan actually approved several years ago. And it's a way to change the Electoral College without changing the Constitution. And if you get this National Popular Vote Compact, if you get enough states to sign on and agree that their electoral votes would be awarded by whoever wins the national popular vote, then you've changed this without changing the constitutions, because the states have the right to decide how their electoral votes are awarded. And if they decide to award them to whoever wins the national popular vote, they can do that. And it's a way for us to try this and see how it works. My objection with the current system is that it disenfranchises a lot of the nation during election campaigns. Think about that last week of the presidential campaign. Where were the candidates? Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Florida, Texas, battleground states. How many stops did they make in Kansas or Kentucky, or even even New York, a large state that was already in the bag, California? And if you're a Democratic voter in Oklahoma, you might as well stay home on election day. If you're a Republican voter in California, you might as well stay home on election day, because your vote really is not going to count. You change that to a national popular vote, and the candidates have to work for every vote everywhere in the nation. The disadvantages in situations like we have now, in terms of, that's a lot of voters casting ballots, and the Electoral College allows it to be broken down in 50 separate units. How would you do a national recount, for example, if there were an issue? But I do think this National Popular Vote Compact might address some of those issues, and you might get greater voter participation, because it would matter what you do for everybody, what they do on election day.
So Lauren, do you want to wrap it up, or do you want me to ask one more question?
Oh, we only have an hour.
That's up to Seth.
Let's do one more question. I think we're all enjoying this so much. We'd like to hear one more. Thank you.
So there was there was a question about social media, which is one of our favorite things to address with the Civility Project. So maybe you guys could spend a little bit of time talking about the impact of social media on civility, on all of this division, and how can we build civility or restore it when there's social media everywhere and nobody really monitoring it or editing in any way?
I don't see any good with it on any level.
Nolan barely participates in social media.
Barely participate. I think it's caused far more, it's supposed to connect us and keep us in touch. It's caused far more relationship issues than anybody can imagine. It's distracted us from serious thought. I think, I was watching a couple in a restaurant the other night, sitting across from each other going like this. I'm like, what in Sam hell is going on here? And, it's led to, it's a horrible way for our children to grow up in terms of their self-esteem and what have you, and their security. But in terms of our political discourse, it's been just god awful. Or our discourse in general. People are more hateful on social media than they would ever be in any other form of communication. They are more likely to engage in incivility and in one-sided conversation. And it continues to break us further into tribes. I saw a poll yesterday, I think I forwarded it to both you and Lynn, Steve and Lynn. Half of the people in this country don't know somebody who thinks differently of them. And I think social media reinforces that break. And that leads to incivility and all sorts of other problems. It leads this thing that was supposed to more tightly connect us has led to greater division, I believe.
Yeah, Nolan's right about the way that social media is kind of destroying personal communication and relationships. I tend to take a kind of historical view of it, though. Social media is just it's the latest sort of technological advance in communication. And if you go back and look at each significant technological advance in communication, they all experience this kind of infancy of chaos and destruction. The telegram was used for incredible misinformation in the run-up to the Civil War. You think about radio and television in their infancy and how just ridiculous they were in terms of what was on them and what could be done with them. And they all kind of grew up to become much, much more substantive and functional. And the power that's behind social media is so incredible in terms of its ability to create community and facilitate community, that I do have hope that it will also grow up. We're in the very early stages of all of this. And 10 years ago, most people weren't on Twitter, and now there's I don't know if it's billions of people, but it's there are certainly hundreds of millions on it. So I keep trying to counsel patience with that we will figure it out, and it will be a tool that actually facilitates communication better than it does. But right now, it drives division and misinformation and all kinds of crazy stuff that is making the things that we were talking about tonight much harder. It is much harder to govern. It is much harder to create, coalitions across political divides because of things like social media.
But, it also, Steve, has a greater ability to manipulate than those other mediums ever did.
Right, because it's self-controlled, right?
Yeah,
it's individually controlled, yeah.
And, they can change opinion. They can put out misinformation campaigns. These big tech companies are more powerful than any media companies before them. And one of the reasons is their single-mindedness right now. They lack a competitive environment in terms of ideology. I think it's a very dangerous thing. The ability for them to use their technology to distort is, we've just seen the beginning.
Yeah.
I want to take the time on behalf of the board and our our guests tonight to thank you, Lynn, Stephen, Nolan, for a very engaging, interesting,